She thought the hardest part was signing her life away to a monster just to save her dying sister. She was entirely wrong. He demanded her absolute obedience, her future and her freedom, but his one unbreakable rule was the very thing that would ultimately shatter both their dark worlds. The relentless rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound keeping Madeline Hayes tethered to reality. The air in room 412 of New York Presbyterian Hospital smelled sharply of industrial bleach and decaying hope. In the narrow hospital bed lay her 19-year-old sister Chloe. Her skin was the color of old parchment, her breathing shallow and ragged. The aggressive strain of acute myeloid leukemia had completely ravaged her immune system, and conventional chemotherapy had officially failed. Madeline, at 26, had exhausted every mortal avenue. She had drained her savings, sold their late parents' modest suburban home, maxed out 6 different credit cards, and launched crowdfunding campaigns that barely covered a week of Chloe's specialized care. Earlier that morning, Dr. Arthur Pendleton had pulled Madeline into the sterile hallway, his eyes heavy with the burden of his profession. "Make her comfortable, Maddie. We are talking about days now. I'm so incredibly sorry." But Madeline refused to let her sister become a memory. Her desperation led her into the gritty, unseen underbelly of the city. A fellow desperate family member in the ICU waiting room had given her a name, whispered only in shadows, Dominic Croft. To the public eye, Dominic was a reclusive billionaire, a real estate mogul who owned half the Manhattan skyline and rarely made public appearances. But in the city's darkest, most desperate corners, he was known as something else entirely. A myth. An ancient predator. The vampire king of the eastern seaboard. It was said that Dominic Croft possessed a cure for any mortal ailment, a gift carried within his own immortal blood. But his price was never money. He dealt only in souls. Through a shady underground broker named Leo Gallagher. Madeline secured a meeting. She was instructed to arrive at a secluded, heavily guarded estate deep in the Hudson Valley at exactly midnight. The rain was coming down in sheets as Madeline stood before the towering iron gates of the Croft estate. She was soaked to the bone, trembling not from the freezing October wind, but from sheer, unadulterated terror. The heavy mahogany doors of the mansion were opened by a silent, impeccably dressed servant who led her through dimly lit halls adorned with centuries-old tapestries and the faint, intoxicating scent of myrrh and copper. She was guided into a sprawling library. Sitting by a roaring fireplace, nursing a glass of dark crimson liquid, was Dominic Croft. He did not look like a monster. He looked like ruinous perfection. Dominic possessed sharp, aristocratic features, piercing charcoal grey eyes that seemed to strip away her defences, and dark hair meticulously styled. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that undoubtedly cost more than her entire life's earnings. Madeline Hayes, his voice resonated through the massive room, smooth as dark velvet, but carrying the terrifying weight of absolute authority. "I am told you wish to make a trade." "My sister." Madeline choked out her voice, betraying her fear. She forced herself to step closer, meeting his predatory gaze. "She is dying. I know what you are. I know what you can do. Please, I'll give you whatever you want." Dominic set his crystal glass down. He rose from his leather armchair, moving with an eerie liquid grace that defied human physics. In the blink of an eye, he was standing mere inches from her. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Up close, she could feel the unnatural stillness of his chest. He didn't breathe. "Humans are so quick to offer everything when they have nothing left," Dominic murmured, lifting a cold, pale hand to trace the line of her jaw. His touch sent a violent shiver down her spine. "I can heal Chloe. A single drop of my blood will rewrite her decaying cells. She will wake up tomorrow morning with no trace of the sickness. She will live a long, healthy, completely normal mortal life." Madeline felt a sob build in her throat. "What is the price?" "You," Dominic stated simply. "You will walk out of that hospital tomorrow and disappear from her life forever. You will come to live in my home. You will belong to me, Madeline. Mind, body, and soul. You will be my companion in the dark, my property. You will never see the sun again, and you will never contact Chloe. She'll think I abandoned her," Madeline whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "She'll hate me." "She will be alive to hate you," Dominic countered ruthlessly. "That is the burden of sacrifice." Madeline closed her eyes, picturing Chloe's frail, sleeping face. It wasn't a choice. It was never a choice. "I accept." Dominic's eyes darkened, the pupils dilating, until they nearly consumed the grey irises. "We have a binding pact, then. But there is one rule, Madeline. A single unbreakable condition of your servitude here." She braced herself, expecting him to demand endless blood or torturous submission. "You are human, and you will remain human." Dominic stepped back, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. "No matter what happens in this house, no matter what you witness, no matter how deeply you may eventually crave it, you must never under any circumstances offer me your blood. If you bleed for me, if my fangs pierce your flesh, the pact is broken. The magic in your sister's veins will turn to ash, and the cancer will kill her within the hour." Madeline frowned, thoroughly confused. "You are a vampire. Why wouldn't you want my blood?" "Because," Dominic said softly, turning his back to the fire, his broad shoulders tense. "I am a king, Madeline, and I have spent 300 years learning to control my hunger. If I taste the blood of a willing, pure soul, I will lose my mind. I will drain you dry, and your sister will die as a consequence. That is my only rule. Never tempt me." The miracle was front-page news in the medical journals, though. Dr. Pendleton could only classify it as an unprecedented, spontaneous remission. Within 24 hours of Madeline's midnight bargain, Chloe's vitals stabilized. Within 48, her white blood cell count returned to normal. By the end of the week, she was sitting up in bed, laughing, eating, and asking for her older sister. But Madeline was already gone. She had left a carefully forged letter, claiming she had accepted a highly lucrative secretive corporate job in Dubai to pay off the medical debts, demanding that Chloe focus on living her life, and promising to stay out of touch due to the strict nature of her new employment. It shattered Madeline's heart into a million pieces, but knowing Chloe was breathing on her own made the agony bearable. Madeline's new reality was the sprawling Gothic modern penthouse atop the Croft Tower in Manhattan. The windows were heavily tinted, blocking out the sun, and wrapping the massive apartment in eternal twilight. For the first 3 months, life with the Vampire King was a bewildering paradox. It was a velvet cage. Madeline had access to a massive library, an indoor greenhouse gourmet food prepared by silent night staff, and a wardrobe filled with silk and cashmere. Dominic was not the brutal monster she had anticipated. In fact, he was infuriatingly civil. They spent their evenings together in his private study. He would read centuries-old literature, or manage his vast empire while she sat on a plush velvet sofa, reading or painting. They spoke of history, of art, of human nature. Dominic was incredibly intelligent, possessing a dry, dark wit that often caught Madeline off guard. But the physical distance between them was intensely calculated. Dominic never came within 3 feet of her. If she walked into a room, he would subtly shift his position. The singular rule hung heavily in the air between them: never offer your blood. However, Madeline quickly learned that Dominic still needed to feed. One evening in late December, she awoke to the sound of hushed voices in the drawing room. Creeping down the hallway, she peered around the corner. A stunning, glamorous woman in a red silk dress, was kneeling before Dominic. He looked different. His fangs were extended, his eyes glowing a predatory, mesmerizing silver. With a swift, fluid motion, he bit into the woman's neck. The woman didn't scream. She moaned in ecstasy, completely under his thrall. Madeline expected to feel horror. Instead, a hot flush of possessive jealousy twisted violently in her stomach. She retreated to her room, deeply disturbed by her own psychological reaction. She was his prisoner. She shouldn't care who he touched or fed from. As the months dragged on into a year, the isolation began to chip away at the walls between them. The polite conversations turned into deep, vulnerable confessions. Dominic told her about his mortal life in the 18th century, the betrayal that led to his turning, and the crushing, agonizing loneliness of outliving everyone he ever loved. Madeline shared stories of her childhood with Chloe, crying softly in the dim light. For the first time, Dominic broke his own physical boundary, gently wiping a tear from her cheek with a cold, pale thumb. The spark of electricity that shot between them was undeniable, terrifying, and consuming. Madeline was falling in love with the monster who owned her. And Dominic, despite his ancient restraint, looked at her with a ravenous hunger that had nothing to do with blood. The fragile equilibrium of their dark romance shattered on a humid night in July. Dominic had a rival, a brutal younger vampire named Rowan Dempsey, who sought to usurp control of the city's underground syndicates. Dominic had gone to negotiate a territorial dispute, demanding Madeline stay locked securely in the penthouse's panic room. When the penthouse elevator finally chimed hours past midnight, Madeline rushed out, ignoring his previous orders. Dominic stumbled into the foyer, leaving a trail of thick black blood on the white marble floor. His usually immaculate suit was shredded. Deep, jagged lacerations tore across his chest and neck, glowing with a sickly, luminescent green light. "Dominic!" Madeline screamed, sliding across the marble to catch him as his legs gave out. His body was freezing, far colder than usual. "Stay! Back!" He gasped, his voice a guttural rasp. He pushed her away with a trembling hand, his eyes clouded with pain. "Rowan," he used blades forged with dead blood and silver. "Poisoned. Let me help you. I'll call someone Leo. Anyone. No one can help." Dominic coughed black blood, splattering his lips. His breathing was ragged, mimicking the terrifying sounds Chloe had made in her final days. "The venom. It is stopping my heart from regenerating." "I'm dying, Madeline." "You can't die, you're immortal," she sobbed, tearing off her cardigan to press against the gaping wound on his neck. "Only pure life force can burn out the dead blood venom," he whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. "But there is no time. The poison has reached my veins." Madeline stared at him, the realization hitting her like a freight train. Pure life force. Human blood. Her blood. She looked at his pale, beautiful face, the face of the man who had saved her sister, the man who had kept her safe, the man she had secretly, desperately fallen in love with. If he died, Rowan Dempsey would take over, and there would be no one to protect her. But his rule echoed in her mind, a death sentence. "If my fangs pierce your flesh, the pact is broken. The cancer will kill her within the hour. Dominic, drink from me," Madeline pleaded, pulling her hair to the side, exposing the frantic, beating pulse at her throat. Dominic's eyes snapped open, glowing a faint, desperate silver. "No. You know the rule. If I take your blood, your sister's cure reverses. She will die, Madeline. You'll die right now." Madeline screamed, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed his cold, blood-stained face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "I am not losing you too. Please, Dominic. I forbid it," he snarled, fighting against his own predatory instincts, his fangs extending as the scent of her fear and adrenaline filled his senses. He tried to push her away again, but he was too weak. "I will not let you kill her for me. I love you too much. The confession stopped her heart. He loved her. Madeline looked at the man dying in her arms, and then thought of her sister, miles away, living a happy, oblivious life. She was caught in an impossible, devastating trap. To save the man she loved, she had to murder her own sister. The marble floor of the penthouse foyer was slick with Dominic's toxic, blackened blood. Madeline's hands shook violently as she cradled his head in her lap. The green luminescence of the poisoned wounds was spreading rapidly, crawling up his throat like glowing ivy. His breathing had reduced to shallow, agonizing gasps, his skin turning the color of wet ash. If my fangs pierce your flesh, the pact is broken. The cancer will kill her within the hour. The absolute finality of his rule echoed like a death knell in her mind, but as Dominic's silver eyes rolled back, slipping into the dark abyss of a final true death, Madeline knew with shattering certainty that she could not let him go. She loved her sister, but Chloe was safe miles away. Dominic was dying in her arms, and he was dying because he had been fighting a territorial war to keep their sanctuary secure. "I'm sorry, Chloe." Madeline sobbed, the words tearing out of her throat. "I am so sorry." Dominic's jaw was locked shut in a rigid, desperate attempt to protect her from himself. He would not bite her. Even in his delirium, his iron will held firm against the monster inside him. Madeline frantically scanned the foyer. Her eyes landed on a shattered crystal vase near the entryway, knocked over when Dominic had stumbled through the door. She lunged for a jagged, wicked-looking shard of glass, her fingers wrapping tightly around the blunt end. She crawled back to him, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She didn't hesitate. Madeline pressed the sharp edge of the crystal across the palm of her left hand and pulled. A sharp hiss of pain escaped her lips as the skin parted, yielding a sudden heavy flow of bright crimson blood. The metallic scent of copper instantly filled the heavy, humid air of the penthouse. Dominic's body violently convulsed. The scent of her pure, willing human blood hit his predatory senses like a shockwave. His fangs snapped down, extending fully, and a primal, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. But he was too weak to move, paralyzed by Rowan Dempsey's silver-laced venom. "Drink!" Madeline ordered, her voice cracking with terror and grief. She pressed her bleeding palm directly against his parted, blood-stained lips. "Dominic, please. Drink it." For an agonizing second, he resisted, his eyes snapping open to glare at her in sheer horror. But the survival instinct of a 300-year-old apex predator was impossible to suppress. As her warm blood dripped onto his tongue, instinct took over. Dominic's hands flew up his cold fingers, wrapping around her wrist like a vice. He pulled her hand flush against his mouth and drank. The sensation was terrifying and strangely intimate. Madeline felt a dizzying rush as her life force was pulled from her veins. But almost instantly, the miraculous biology of the Vampire King began to react. The sickly green glow of the dead blood poison in his chest began to sizzle and steam, evaporating under the overwhelming power of a pure, uncorrupted soul. The deep, jagged lacerations on his neck began to knit together, the shredded flesh reweaving itself at an impossible speed. Within moments, the suffocating pallor left his skin, his eyes completely consumed by an ethereal, blinding silver light locked onto hers. He dropped her hand, gasping loudly, as his lungs filled with air, the venom completely purged from his system. He was healed, but the silence that followed was heavier than death. Dominic pushed himself backward, scrambling away from her, until his back hit the heavy oak console table. He looked at the smear of her blood on his lips, and then down at her bleeding hand. His expression twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated devastation. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice trembling, a sound Madeline had never heard from the terrifying, stoic billionaire. "Madeline, what have you done?" "I saved you," she cried, grabbing a discarded silk scarf to wrap tightly around her hand. "You killed your sister!" Dominic roared, the sound shaking the glass of the penthouse windows. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. "I told you the rule. The magic is severed. The leukemia, it will return instantly. The pact is broken." Madeline collapsed onto the floor, the adrenaline leaving her body in a rush, replaced by a suffocating blanket of grief. She had done the unthinkable. She had traded one life for another. "I couldn't let you die," she whispered into the empty foyer, wrapping her arms around her knees. For the next 4 hours they sat in absolute, miserable silence. Dominic refused to look at her, trapped in his own agonizing guilt. As the sun began to rise over Manhattan, casting a dull grey light through the heavily tinted windows, Madeline knew she had to face the reality of her choice. She walked to the landline in Dominic's study. Her hands shook so badly she misdialed twice before finally connecting to the oncology ward of New York Presbyterian Hospital. "Nurses' station, this is Sarah," a cheerful voice answered. "Sarah." Madeline choked out, leaning heavily against the mahogany desk. "This is Madeline Hayes. I need to know about Chloe Hayes. Was she brought in tonight? Is she—" She couldn't finish the sentence. There was a pause, accompanied by the clicking of a keyboard. "Chloe Hayes. Let me check her outpatient file. Madeline, honey, you haven't been listed as her primary contact for a year, but I see her records. Chloe was here 2 days ago for her routine, 1-year remission checkup with Dr. Pendleton." Madeline's blood ran cold. 2 days ago. But what about tonight? Did she crash? Did the cancer come back? "What, no, sweetie?" The nurse sounded thoroughly confused. "Chloe is completely fine. Dr. Pendleton signed off on a clean bill of health. Her blood work is perfect. Actually, she posted on her social media a few hours ago from a concert in Brooklyn. Are you all right? You sound terrible." The phone slipped from Madeline's grip, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. Chloe wasn't dead. The cancer hadn't returned. The magic hadn't unraveled. Madeline turned slowly. Dominic was standing in the doorway of the study, his expression unreadable. He had heard every word with his heightened senses. "She's alive." Madeline breathed, the shock paralyzing her vocal cords. "The pact. It broke. I gave you my blood. Why is she alive?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the desk, picked up the receiver, and placed it back on the cradle. When he finally looked at her, the mask of the terrifying Vampire King had completely shattered, leaving behind a deeply haunted, tragically flawed man. "Because," Dominic said softly, his voice thick with a century of buried sorrow. "Vampire blood is not a spell, Madeline. It is a biological rewrite. Once the mortal body is cured, it remains cured. There was never any magic tether connecting her life to my fangs." Madeline stared at him, the words sinking into her exhausted brain. "Then the rule, the pact, it was a lie." "Yes." Dominic confessed the word, dropping between them like a lead weight. It was a lie. Anger, hot and blinding, flared in Madeline's chest. She marched across the room and shoved Dominic hard against the chest. To her surprise, he let her move him. His head bowed in quiet submission. "You lied to me," she screamed, the betrayal cutting deeper than the glass that sliced her hand. "You made me believe I held my sister's life in my hands every single second of every single day. You let me agonizingly choose between your life and hers tonight. Why? If you didn't want my blood, why not just say no? Why invent a psychological torture chamber?" "To protect you from me," Dominic shouted back, his own restraint, finally snapping. He grabbed her shoulders, not forcefully, but with a desperate intensity. "Because I knew what would happen if you ever stayed with me." He pulled away, pacing the length of the study like a caged panther. "In 1842 in London, Dominic began, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. I fell in love with a mortal woman. Her name was Genevieve. She was everything you are brave, fiercely loyal, and dangerously selfless. She discovered what I was, and she did not run. She stayed. Dominic stopped pacing, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, though his eyes were seeing a tragedy centuries past. Vampires are apex predators, Madeline. We are designed to consume. When a mortal willingly offers their blood to a vampire they love, it is an intoxicant, unlike anything on this earth. It creates an addictive, soul-binding bond. Genevieve offered me her blood, and I took it. But I couldn't stop. The hunger overpowered my love for her. I drained her dry on the floor of our drawing room. I held her as she died, knowing the monster inside me had murdered the only light in my miserable eternal life. He turned back to Madeline, a single tear of blood tracing down his pale cheek. When you came to me begging for your sister's life, I saw Genevieve's fire in your eyes. I knew that if I brought you into my world, you would eventually love me. And I knew that in your fierce loyalty, you would one day offer me your blood. If I took it, I would lose control. I would kill you. Madeline's breath hitched the pieces of the puzzle, violently snapping together. So you created the ultimate deterrent, she whispered, her anger slowly dissolving into a profound, aching sorrow. I needed a barrier you would never cross, Dominic admitted softly. I knew you valued your sister's life above your own. I knew you would gladly die for me, but you would never, ever risk killing Chloe. It was the only way to ensure you would never offer me your veins. It was the only way I could keep you near me without becoming the monster that would destroy you. Madeline looked at her bandaged hand, and then at the man who had orchestrated a massive, terrifying lie out of a desperate, twisted desire to keep her safe. He had played the role of a ruthless villain, just so she wouldn't become the victim of his nature. But I did offer it, Madeline said, quietly stepping toward him. Tonight? And you drank? I did. Dominic breathed his eyes, searching hers frantically. And the moment I tasted it, the hunger was there. The beast was there. But he paused, looking at his own trembling hands. I stopped. I didn't drain you. Madeline reached out gently, placing her uninjured hand against his cold cheek. You stopped because you are not the same man you were in 1842, Dominic. You spent centuries building your control. You built an empire. You saved my sister. You are a king, not a feral beast. The heavy oppressive tension that had lived in the penthouse for over a year finally broke. Dominic pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck, breathing in her scent, without the desperate urge to bite. Rowan Dempsey is still out there, Dominic murmured against her skin, the reality of their dangerous world creeping back in. Then you will deal with him, Madeline said fiercely, stepping back to look him in the eye. She was no longer a terrified hostage negotiating a medical debt. She was the woman who had just saved the most powerful predator on the eastern seaboard. You will tear his syndicate apart, Dominic, because no one threatens my family. And you are my family. A dark, incredibly dangerous smile curved Dominic's lips. It was the smile of a king who had just found his queen. Leo Gallagher has Rowan's location at a warehouse in Hell's Kitchen. Dominic stated, his eyes flashing silver, but this time the light was controlled, calculated, and lethal. He will not live to see tomorrow night. The velvet cage was gone. The unbreakable rule was shattered. Madeline had sold her soul to save her sister, only to realize the vampire who bought it had desperately needed someone to save his own. As Dominic prepared to go to war for their future, Madeline walked to the heavy blackout curtains and pulled them shut tight, securing their sanctuary. She was no longer a prisoner of the dark. She had chosen to rule it. Wow, what a massive twist Dominic lied about the curse, just to protect Madeline from his own monstrous nature. Their dark bargain turned into a brutal fight for survival and love. If this intense vampire drama had your heart racing, make sure to smash that like button and share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss another thrilling story. Let me know in the comments, would you have risked it all to save him?